I'm Will Hedrick.
And I'm Jordan Schaffer.
And this is Dog Ears and Timestamps, a book club podcast.
We're solving this mystery.
Solving it.
Yeah.
It's getting done next week.
But dude,
we're getting started.
We're solving it.
We're solving
We
it.
solved it.
We know exactly who all is involved and what happened. We don't even need to finish the book. We're going to give y'all the answers in this episode. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Well, yeah, how was your week? Well, what'd you do? What'd you read?
I worked and I read last night.
Nice.
It's the same story as ever.
Yeah, dude, this book's been very consistently making me do that, dude. Just last day before.
There's times that I'm not like super excited to get to it, like in previous books that we've read. Mm-hmm. So I'm not like, all right, well, I'll read 30 minutes tonight and then I can, read 30 minutes tomorrow or anything like that. It's just like, and then, being busy with other things and all that sort of stuff that it just ends up piling up towards the end. And like one night I'll put it off. I'll be like, I don't want to read it tonight. Yeah. And then the next night I've got something I have to do. Mm-hmm. And then it's just like the night before. I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to read it all.
I have to do this, yeah. Well, cool, yeah. So last night, I guess, did you read like before bed?
Yeah. I knew that I was going to have to read it all. So when I got home from work, I made dinner, ate that, and then read.
Just the rest of the night? Yeah. Nice.
It took me about maybe 3 hours.
Okay, yeah.
So it wasn't so bad.
Cool. And the notes today at
I did notes at work.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, dude, same story for me. I was busy all weekend. I went out to the ranch, went hunting, which is cool. Yeah, just normal work week though, other than that. And then I literally listened to the book today. I'm not 100% sure. Well, I'm 100% sure I didn't stop in the right spot because I didn't know where the right spot was to stop. So I actually do know what happened. But I'm not going to give any spoilers. Okay. So, but it was awesome. I mean, I listened to it today twice, and I'm going to listen to the whole thing. The whole book. It's a whole chunk for this next episode. I think that'll be good to wrap it all up and give me a good solid foundation.
Help you out. It's definitely better.
Yeah, no,
it's more engaging.
Yeah, that's a better way to say it because it was always interesting. Like learning about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle has been interesting. Mm-hmm. The mind behind Sherlock Holmes, like learning that like he's got his own little scandal that he's trying to hide, and yet like still trying to do right by everybody, and he's not even nobody even judges him for this. I don't know.
Yeah, seemingly cool. Nobody cares.
Yeah, it's
at least internally, everybody that we see and that he talks to and that matters to him doesn't judge him at all.
Yeah, it doesn't.
They're like, you know what, you're doing your thing. We get it.
Yeah,
we've seen it a million times. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of times that some of his family says like, you gotta be careful in public because other people might not think the same thing that we do. Yeah. But yeah, like he's going through all this effort for everybody's sake and nobody gives a shit. Yeah. It's just kind of, like you said, it's interesting. It's interesting to have seen and learned and read everything so far. Just hasn't been super engaging. Yeah,
and then with George, I'm sure I'm going to say his last name, Adelji. Yeah, with him, he's just been, like at the beginning, I feel like when we were talking about him, we thought he was on the scale of autism. And then just like as we meet him and go on, it seems like he doesn't really have any social
less
barrier.
Like it.
Yeah, it seems like it's like very prominent in his backstory. And then it doesn't seem obvious at all. And, I mean, it talks about...
And it can very well just be... This is something I was considering while I was reading last night as well. Because Arthur doesn't say anything about it whenever he first meets him. Not in his like internal like assessment of George. Because whenever he first meets him at the hotel... Yeah, that was cool. He holds off for a second to sort of observe him and get an idea. Yeah. And notices that his eyes are probably fucked up because of the way he's holding the newspaper super close and turned. And he's like, okay, well, I know what that is. Yeah. And then throughout the interaction with him, there's never any mention of George being like, man, he is odd. Or, even if they didn't have a definition for autism or Asperger's or anything back then, he doesn't even say anything like that, where he's like, he's strange, or he's socially awkward, or anything like that. Yeah. Which then kind of, now that he's become an adult, maybe George has learned those social ineptitudes that he had and like come over them. Yeah. And which leads to just like, he wasn't homeschooled, but he didn't go out in public ever, like he mentions during his conversation with Arthur.
It wasn't a huge town, right, either that he was in? It seems like a pretty small one, but he was close to...
evidently just went to school and came home. They didn't mix with the public, so he didn't have anybody to talk to except his family. Yeah. So
I don't think it was necessarily his intent to stay at home, but I think he got stuck.
I think he had no interest in, at least whenever he was growing up. And in the first chapter, we know that he had no interest in meeting anybody else or doing anything. He was fine just living his life at home. Yeah. and then whenever he gets a little bit older, he wants to kind of move out. But I think he wants to move out, one, because he has the itch of like, I've never been away.
Yeah.
And he's got like some discrepancy with his parents' religion now. He doesn't really feel that a lot of that is what he once thought it was. So he's like, well, I'm going to continue living at a church, having to do this when I don't really believe in it.
Yeah, that's got to be pretty interesting, because it's even kind of hard at like on a smaller level, just doing that in your own life with your parents. Like
it can be, depending on like who your parents. I have friends who still lie to their parents about them either believing or not believing in whatever.
Yeah.
It's not a problem that I had for a long time. When I turned 18, I was just like, hey, this is how it is. I'm not going to church anymore.
Yeah.
And it was definitely kind of a big deal for a week or two there, where there was some immediate resistance where they were like, no, you're going to go to church. Like, that's just not a thing. And then I just didn't. I mean, in the way that I've done a lot of things in my life, I just did whatever I was going to do. Yeah. And now it's not a problem at all. It's something that can be openly talked about and accepted and, you know, promoted to some degree. Good. But it is definitely something that's really strange. I can't imagine having to have done that if my father was the preacher.
Oh, no, yeah. It would probably be lying for sure.
Yeah, that would be... I would like to... Well, I guess my whole life would be different, so who knows who I would have been at that point. But I would like to think that me would still be like, no, I'm going to say it. Yeah. It just probably would have taken longer, and it probably would have happened in a different way.
For sure.
So, yeah, and so I think that he suffers more from what I call homeschooler syndrome than from autism.
I got you. That makes sense.
Because if you've ever met, and you have met, homeschoolers, they're just weird.
They are a little weird.
The way that they think is different. The way that they act with everybody is different. They're just weirdos. And it's not their fault. It's just that they met like 5 people when they were growing up.
They do end up being successful, it seems like, though.
I think that they probably are skewed more that way. Maybe they have a better propensity for focus and things like that. Yeah, right?
But, yeah, man. So, dude, there's just, like, so many levels to both these guys. And it's, that's been, like, fun. It's hard to make that super engaging, I guess. And, like, without, like, I don't know, making a big deal of, like, the scandal or whatever. Like, I don't know. And since it all is just sort of, like, fact, it's not necessarily, you can't, like, doll it up too much. You don't want
to, too much embellishment will maybe take it away from what you're trying to do by, you know, writing this down and making it, you know, a novel or whatever. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like as I was thinking about it, as I was reading it, with, you know, it now really taking off, is that like we've already discussed, the first chapter is like growing up with them as people so that we can get to know them, because maybe that's, you know, important, or at the very least it was...
I knew nothing about either of them. I barely even knew that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle did Sherlock Holmes until, like, you told me. So.
Yeah, there was really not too much I knew about him either. I definitely knew nothing about George. And so being able to grow up with them in those 60 pages or however many pages there were, I think was valuable, and I can see why it would be valuable to somebody trying to write a novel about them. And, you know, we'll see how valuable that ends up after everything is over, you know, how it can relate or what it added to the experience. And then the first chapter is them as adults, and I feel like having Arthur in there was almost inconsequential. It was more about experiencing everything that was happening to George with George. Yeah. Because that's what this is all about. Is it's all about the harassment and then the framing and the trial. Yeah. And the sentencing. That's what this whole novel is about, and then him becoming exonerated, presumably. So it would be also important to experience that as it's happening with the character it's happening to. And then we can, having experienced it from his point of view in the same way that he would, we can go through the investigation by Arthur with George, and, you know, I feel like it's a little bit easier, or maybe not easier, but I think it's an interesting way to look at a mystery novel, right? Is to have experienced the problem that needs to be solved, and then solve it with whoever's going to solve it, rather than... In a lot of my experience, you get, like, in different novels that I've written, or, you know, mystery movies that I've watched or shows or whatever, they maybe present you with, like, the thing that happens at the beginning of the movie. Let's say like somebody gets murdered. You see like a shadow get murdered,
like in
and then it cuts to the detective like in his office, and whatever, and then he's on the case and he's figuring it out and you're figuring it out at the same time. So you don't really experience the crime and things that led up to the crime. So it's just a little bit different. And I don't think I was expecting that at first. And right now I appreciate it. We'll see if it pulls together in the way that I hope it does, where everything ends up having actually been important, and I'm not just hoping that it was important.
For sure.
Hoping that I didn't spend 4 episodes of this show and a bunch of time reading late at night for it to not have mattered. Right. A pretty big bummer.
But no, I think it's coming together really well, and I think it's I don't know. We'll see how it wraps up.
It's hard to say too much without saying too much.
Right, yeah, because it's it's good. It's a fun read, and it'll be more fun to like analyze it all as a whole, I think, next week. Yeah. So let's get into it, dude. Where did we leave off last week?
So this is a new chapter. It's chapter 3, ending with the beginning. It starts with Arthur seeing, so last chapter ended with Arthur seeing the letter from George and being like, and kind of dramatically written, and seeing a signature from a person he didn't recognize, something like that. It's like, who's that? Well, it's George.
Yeah. And it starts off the chapter being like all grandiose and like, ever since the release of Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had been getting written letters to solve mysteries.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh god.
So he was like no stranger to request, and he had declined everything so far, because whatever, he wasn't interested, didn't think he was actually qualified to do that.
Right, just
whatever
you can
it
write
was.
A mystery doesn't mean you can solve a mystery.
This seems to have come at a sort of perfect time for him, where he's just now forcing himself to get over the depression and the slump of life that he was in after Tui dying. So he was maybe looking for something to latch onto.
Right.
Reads George's plea and explanation for everything that's happened. Decides for himself that George must be innocent. It's plain as day. So he's like, I'm going to fucking do this, man.
I wish they would have said, like, in the letter what convinced him right then. Like, plain as day. I get it.
Right. And I wonder if it was a specific point or just the whole picture.
Yeah.
That Arthur was like, look at all this shit. What the fuck?
Look at all these. Yeah. How did they convict him?
And so, and maybe he had even like kind of in passing heard about what had happened, because it had gotten play in the newspapers, Yeah. So maybe he saw like, just like read like half the update every week, like, oh, okay, well, this is what's happening in that case, blah, blah, blah. And then now he's getting the side from the person who's convicted, and it was like, well, holy shit, like, anyways, so he decides he's going to take on the case, tells his assistant Wood that he's going to do so. And,
Watson.
Watson is really, so he goes to meet with George.
Yeah.
They go meet at the Grand Hotel in Charing Cross in London, and immediately notices, like we said earlier when we were talking about it, George has got bad eyesight. Takes that second to look at him, sees that he's holding the paper sideways. Is like, well, shit, he's probably got some astigmatism, a little myopia.
I liked how that little scene was written too, because it felt kind of like Sherlock Holmesy. Like he walked into this bar or whatever. Well, it was the hotel. So, but I imagine this bar that he walked into, and they were just like, I just imagine a couple groups of people, and he did this like internal dialogue, like analyzing kind of what was going on. There was like one brown person, so it was kind of easy to pick.
Right, he like immediately picks him out. Right.
Yeah, and like from India. From where is he from? Do we know?
Yes. Yeah. So his father is a Parsi.
A Parsi. Okay.
Who is a group of people that are actually Persian that fled that area to India because of religious persecution that was happening.
Gotcha.
So they're Indian now, but they're immigrants to India that are not Indian by heritage. If you go further back,
Okay.
George is obviously born in England, as we know.
Yeah.
But that's his father's
his father, okay.
heritage.
Yeah, and then all the stuff, just like how he analyzed, like, okay, well, how could he have gotten, like, he saw just like in the first few seconds, like, okay, this guy can't see anything. There's no way, if he never had glasses, how is he going to go traipsing through the night to get this,
right,
mutilate all these animals? Like, that's crazy. So just right off the bat, it's almost like he looks, he sees, he's like, okay, I'm right.
Yeah.
let's go talk.
They go talk, they go hang out in a writing room at the hotel and kind of just go over everything. George gives him, like, you know, his whole story, and he details that maybe weren't in the letter that he had written. And then they sort of also spend a little bit of time getting to know each other a little bit more.
Yeah.
Asking, George asks Arthur if he's a Christian because there's some, you know, point he wants to make about his father's belief and the way that he's going about everything. And thus how George wants to proceed and not be like, you know, I don't want to look at myself as a martyr. I don't think I stand for any sort of great foreign agenda nor Christian example.
Yeah.
And so I don't want any of us to look at it that way. I just want my life back. I just want to be a solicitor and just, you know, have my quiet job where I'm useful to the public. That's like all I want. And I don't want any of that other stuff to be part of it. Arthur sort of agrees. He's not a Christian, but he does have some sort of spiritual belief, which we know, you know, he's into Spiritism, which is some sort of like New Age, or I guess then New Age, you know, kind of sciencey based turning of, you know, conventional religion.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I kind of wish I got the little section we talked about earlier that you got.
Yeah, when we were going over notes, there's a section where Arthur and Jean talk about his Spiritism, because Jean is still Catholic. Yeah. And has, like, heard Arthur talk about it a little bit, but she's kind of shut him down in prior conversations. Like, I don't want to talk about that, blah, blah, blah. And now that they're on the doorstep of getting married, she's like, we need to talk about this. So they talk about that a little bit, and it's interesting. It won't have any bearing on the story, as far as we're concerned. It'll have bearing on their life, but it shouldn't matter the case. But it is interesting to hear Arthur talk about it and the way that he thinks about it. But so in the conversation in the writing room, basically all that happens. They get to know each other a bit more. They go over the case, what they each think about it. George is pretty stubborn almost that it's not about race.
Yeah, it almost seems like he kind of pushes that, like, to, I don't want to call him ignorant, like, because it almost seems like it is about race, but...
It's the obvious answer.
Yeah, but
he makes a lot of really good points about it. He's like, well, somebody else was persecuted. I was never persecuted directly or personally in any way that couldn't have been explained by other means. Like, whenever he even calls out the constable, I can't remember his name, that, like, accosts him a couple times, and it's kind of
Gillespie. I'm just kidding. No, that's wait, last book.
Right. He's like, but I'm sure that dude's just an asshole, and he probably did that to other boys whenever he thought they were being a pain in the ass too.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
Like,
exactly.
So like he can find a good reason for every, you know, instance that somebody might just immediately think, oh, they're racist. You know. So at the very least, even. And all of those, you know, points that he makes are 50-50 points. Like, they could be like, yeah, you're right. It probably was nothing. Or it could be racism.
Right.
Like, it goes either way.
Gives it another one.
Yeah, he's just providing other options because he's being completely level-headed. And the way that he thinks as a man of the law is like, these are all the different things that could be a possibility and are worth, you know, at least knowing.
Yeah, I like the faith he has in his, like, community too. Just like, it's not about race. Like, these are the people I've been around. Like, they know me. They've supported me. They taught me. You know, like
all the people that he's done business with and not giving him trouble. You know, he goes to the bootmaker. He goes and gets groceries. He does that sort of, you know. So
life isn't, like, hard for him because of his skin color. It doesn't seem like, and he's a solicitor, which seems like a really hard job to get back then. Well, impossible maybe in.
It's probably
in the
a lot
States,
of effort.
Probably in England and stuff is probably a little bit, I'm sure, racist, because they weren't. Were they racist in England back then? Maybe
I'm
probably
sure
not.
they were.
Yeah,
I think that at least without having done any actual research on it, conventional wisdom tells me that they progressed faster than we did.
Right.
There's definitely still racism in literally every country of the world. So that's not to say that there's not racist in England and Britain right now.
Sure. Yeah,
but I think as a society, I think that it progressed more quickly than
That's what
America
I would assume.
did.
It seemed like everything was, at least, especially just
even if it was only a step
here,
at a time, it was still a couple of steps ahead of us.
It seems like at least maybe a generation ahead. Like they were ready to accept multi-race. Like
Arthur, as a nobleman, immediately does not care about that, and it's never even something that he thinks about.
Just the only time he thinks about it is when it's like for the case, and like maybe it was negative for George.
Right, just recognizing it as a thing that could happen in society.
Yeah.
But to like him personally, it means nothing. He's just another person.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that probably it could be said that they were a little bit more progressive than we were, at least, year by year.
Yeah. Well, their interaction was kind of cool just because I think...
Seeing them finally come together.
Yeah, definitely.
The one thing.
Yeah, and then just Arthur was full force, like, you're gonna take my money and do this thing. We're gonna...
He wants him to go get his eyes checked.
Right, that's what it is. They go to the oculist or whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's a cool word. And get his eyes checked. That'll basically
to get a
be
diagnosis
enough, I would think. And then and he's like adamant about getting the money as being part of the
he
deal.
wants reparations, not just
reparations.
like an exoneration.
Yeah, because then it'll show that the town, like that him serving the 3 years was unjust, and that's him getting repaired. What is that the short form? Reparated.
Yeah.
he's getting his compensation for having to do time unjustly.
Right.
Yeah, serving time.
The way that he explains it is sort of like, if they pronounce you innocent and get you back on the roll and you can be a solicitor, then the country will know that you were innocent. Mm-hmm. If the country has to pay you, or if the government and the Home Office have to pay you money, then everybody in the country, italics, knows you're innocent.
Yeah, they apologize. Yeah, exactly. And that was just like interesting because like they both made a point too about how like Arthur doesn't need money, so it wasn't really about the money for him at all, and it was just about. It almost seemed like his
Arthur
passion
just
project.
truly believes. Yeah,
yeah.
He wants to, like we mentioned earlier, wants to throw himself into something. Certainly something that he believes in. He truly believes in all this.
Yeah, he wants to do.
Or
justice.
not even like at the end of the conversation, like he says, he doesn't believe. He says, "I don't think you're innocent. I don't believe you're innocent. I know you're innocent." And so he's got like 100% conviction on this. And he says things like, "I'm gonna make some noise."
Yeah.
English don't like noise and stuff like that.
He's just
like
noise.
He's ready to stir it up and make everything right for George. He almost seems to have taken it personally to a degree.
Yeah.
Which, for the way he wants to go about it, I guess is good. Because it makes him have, like, even if it's a made-up dog, a dog in the race.
It definitely gives George more faith in Arthur, I feel like. I don't know if that was necessarily...
It might not have been what he expected.
But it was definitely like, he was just like, okay, wow. Like, because he kind of was like, no, it's not about the money. He's like, no, I know it's not about the money in your pocket. It's about the money in the story.
Right,
so
yeah.
It's just like, okay. There's just, he was in it to like clear his name and help him out. I don't know. It was just cool. It almost seemed like he got nothing out of it.
Yeah.
Because he got, I'm sure we're about to talk about it now, but he starts to almost get mocked when he takes on the case, A little bit, yeah. There's, at the very least, there's one person that outright makes fun of him to him, and that's Captain Anson. Yeah.
There's
Captain Anson.
So they part. George tells him to go talk with Harry Charlesworth, one of the kids that he went to school with. He was the other smart kid, the one that didn't pick on him. But they weren't friends. He was just the other smart kid. And it was just like, okay, whatever. To be friends with him he would make him up as a friend whenever like his aunt would ask him, "Do you have any friends at school?" But he says, you can talk to Harry Charlesworth as like a contact in Wirely. He's a good enough fellow, and if anybody may be on my side or willing to at least give information, it would be him. Okay. So Arthur goes and starts preparing for his expedition. He sends his assistant / secretary / caddy / anything really, Wood, to Wirely ahead of him to do some scouting and have some information for whenever he arrives. And then he himself does a shit ton of research on the area. Yeah. He like looks up like anything that you can imagine, whether it matters or not to what he's going there for. he knows it now.
Yeah.
He's just obsessive about it.
Which is pretty impressive without Google.
Right?
Yeah, I don't even know.
You just go through public records.
You had to start reading all the newspapers or what? Like, ugh.
Well, you probably, I mean, I imagine...
I'm sure you're really good at skimming newspapers in that time.
Right.
You read one every morning, like, but...
And imagine Sir Arthur Conan Doyle doesn't have to go to the public library. I'm sure he can request those things to be brought to him.
Oh, I bet he does have a lot of things.
Yeah.
A bunch of little mice running around.
But he would be able to go through public record and see different... Because he knows who the station master is there, and that he inherited the position from his father, who was the station master.
He can't just go through the court cases, you know, because he's going to go through the court cases, all the investigative reports. It's all public record and stuff.
Right, yeah. So he just acquires all of that somewhere, and he pours through all of it for whatever does or doesn't matter. I guess his idea is that we'll just read everything, and if it comes up, then I know it. If it doesn't come up, you know, whatever.
I feel like it kind of helps too that he's a literal doctor, like he knows medicine.
Yeah,
you know, he was able to diagnose the nearsightedness. I mean, I don't know if everybody knew about that back then. If obviously Ben Franklin or whatever made bifocals, so they knew about glasses way before that. But,
right. Yeah.
But it being maybe common practice, sort of.
The way that George, because in part of their conversation whenever they first meet, he talks about it. He's like, yeah, I mean, I was determined to have bad eyesight early on. The oculist said it wasn't a good idea for kids to use it as a crutch to develop a bit more and then get it later. But then whenever I became old enough to start to get it, I was too busy with school and becoming a solicitor. And then I got even busier with all of this shit.
Yeah.
And now I just don't want to, I don't care.
I just forget.
Yeah. So he probably would have had glasses sooner had he not been more preoccupied with other things, and he probably just didn't even care to begin with. He had gotten by prior to.
Yeah,
so why worry about spending money on something that he evidently didn't need? And maybe once he gets glasses, he'll be like, "Oh shit, the goddamn game changer!"
Way better.
Yeah. but yeah, and so he goes to Wirely, stops by Jean's first to go talk to her and be like, "Hey, I'm taking up this thing." He tells her all about it. She's actually like interested in it or whatever. She has like a bit of an internal dialogue. I don't know how much of that section you might have had.
I don't think I really had much, but so
okay.
Go ahead and...
It's just a short thing where she decides that she's going to be like a proactive wife.
Oh, well, I got a little bit of a letter from...
That's later.
Oh, okay. Then never mind.
Yeah, but it's just, she decides that she's going to be like a proactive wife with him.
Yeah.
Like she's going to go anywhere that he goes. She's not just going to be like the enabler, just be like, okay, yeah, have fun doing this investigation or whatever, and just like holding down the household. She's going to be there.
That's awesome.
And so that's just like the way that that's the kind of wife she wants to be or whatever. And so she just kind of resolves that.
I think I might have gotten enough of that from the later section because all that does sound familiar, but I don't know if I necessarily got the internal dialogue.
Maybe it gets restructured for you a little bit.
Yeah, but I do get a sense of that, if not just it spelled out. So
that's more or less all it is.
Yeah,
it's in a bit more words than that, but whatever. And so then he continues on to Wirely. They get there, and then they go to the vicarage to meet George's family.
Yeah,
and they talk with them a bit.
Yeah, that was I feel like probably just a bit of evidence that really convinced him for some reason, because the whole family.
He gets totally sold on them.
Yeah.
He's totally like, man, these are like great people.
Yeah. And either they were all lying about seeing hares to protect their family, like their, their son and brother or whatever, or, the police are just gung ho to get someone.
Yeah. That becomes like one of the points that he gets kind of that are like, that's a focus of his investigation.
Yeah, and then with the delay
what about the hairs
getting the coat to the doctor, what do you call him?
It's a forensics thing.
The forensic guy.
Yeah. Like back then they didn't call him that. They just called him a police surgeon or something like that.
But yeah, it took him a while to take it to the lab or whatever to look at it.
Yeah, she finds that out whenever he talks to Dr. Butter. But he gets all the letters from George's family that they've been collecting. They go over a couple of things while they're there. They point him in the direction of Brooks, which is the ironmonger who had also been getting harassed the first time that they were getting harassed, but didn't really care. He didn't like report it to the police or anything. It's just a fucking prank. Like, I don't care. I'm just going to ignore it. And so the next day they go talk to him. And he's like, yeah, I mean, here's these letters. I don't think it's anything, whatever. And then if you want to find out anything additional that might have to do with at least our part in it, you can go talk to my son. Because he had, and this is something that got touched on earlier in the book whenever everything was happening, but his son and another boy had at one point gotten into a bit of a fight with some other boy named Speck. Because Speck had broken a carriage window on the train and tried to blame them. And they were like, nah, dude, it was him, whenever they were talking to like the station master or whoever. And then ended up all three of them just got like a warning because they were like, we can't determine what the fuck's going on. Who cares? And then in some of the harassment, in one of the like ads taken out in the paper in their name, where like they apologized for the girl that they fired. There was also in that same one, if I remember, correctly, or it's a different one or whatever, but there was an apology from Brooks and Wynn, his friend, for having tried to slander Speck for, the argument or whatever happened and blah, blah, blah. So there's evidently somebody, like we had already speculated, that's out for revenge to some degree that is a part of this harassment thing, who, or at the very least is going under the guise of having revenge for the girl and then on Speck's behalf or whatever. At the very least, those are two obvious things that somebody just in passing could be like, oh yeah, they fired that one girl, fuck them. Or they accused that one boy of doing this thing, fuck them. Yeah. Like it's an easy sort of mask to put on at the very least. So then they go talk to Brooks' son, who's now like an adult and lives in Birmingham. And he doesn't have a whole lot of information either. Says, or gives them greater details on the Speck thing. And then I think that...
why they called him Speck, right?
No. Nobody knows anything about that.
Oh. Something else I was thinking about that.
Prior to all of that, actually, they go see Harry Charlesworth, the person that George told them to go see. His classmate, who was also the other clever one. Yeah. And they really, just out of him, they get sort of like his point of view on everything. Harry's like, there's no way George did that shit. Like, not anything near like the George that I grew up with. And
no, there's no way he would do that. Yeah. First of all, I mean,
he has the angle of, because now he didn't like leave the town to go get like a more professional job despite being smart. He inherited his father's dairy farm.
Does he?
And so his angle is like, you'd have to be really good with animals. You don't just walk up to a horse and be like, yo, I'm going to cut you, and then cut
I was about to say that, but I wasn't 100% sure if that was like, I heard that at the right point or not. Yeah, that's like one of the biggest things is like, you got to be good with animals and you got to coax them for a little while or whatever,
Which is something that was already, at least in the book, given, because there was a section that was just the shadow figure taking forever to get to the horse and calming the horse and then doing so. So we know that was the method being used, but now we've got somebody being like, there's no fucking way George could do that. If George sat down to milk one of my cows, he would have gotten kicked before he even like entered the room, basically,
God, how do you even slit a horse that good without getting fucking mauled?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's so hard. Damn.
You have to be good enough with the animal to get it to trust you.
To get under it and give it one big
and then just slice. Real quick, they still haven't determined the weapon that was used. Yeah. But they keep, conjecturing that it's some sort of rounded blade with concave sides. So that sounds like leather working tools, which are, those are like, so those are like, super crazy sharp. And he doesn't gut them. He just cuts them enough that they bleed a lot and then have to be put down. He probably cuts some of the muscle in the process because it's, a huge, not huge, but it's a really sharp knife. He seems to just slice them as quickly as he can, just like up the chest or something like that, and then be gone. That's all the damage he had to do. Now the horse is bleeding out for hours at night and nobody can see it, so it's going to die. Or be put into a state that it would have to be put down. So I guess that's how they do it. That's how I imagine I would approach it if that was going to be my goal.
Right, yeah. Ugh. Yeah, how would I do that? I guess I would probably... Yeah, no, I feel like a hook would be pretty good. No, because I'd have to hook it in first. No, I'd probably just get...
You have to be really fucking strong for a hook.
Yeah. And anything too small would get stuck and left in the horse. It'd have to be like razor sharp, really long.
Yeah.
Maybe a razor blade like that guy said, since it's so sharp.
Well, the thing about a rounded blade is that it's not going to get caught.
That would be good. Like an ulu knife. I've got an ulu knife that would work pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Probably ulu that guy.
Yeah.
Ulu the horse.
Say ulu one more time.
Ulu. Ulu. Yeah, that would be one of the hardest, least fulfilling crimes to ever commit. To just slice up a horse.
Right.
It's like it serves no purpose. You feel awful at the end of it. And
it's one of those things that like it's just hard to imagine what's the goal, what's the purpose, what's the reward.
Right.
But there are crazy people.
Right, for sure.
So
and
some crazy person has some sort of crazy reward out of that. And then presumably if they're involved in the campaign against the Adelges, then it's a reason to frame.
Yeah.
So that's also something that they may be considering if they're less crazy than we might initially think they are. Peter.
Yeah.
Shut up, dude. But so yeah, they're interacting with Harry. Harry's giving them, his side of the story, his opinion.
Yeah.
As much information as he can, because he's not against George.
No.
And it's a good distraction from the dairy farm, which he seems to sort of resent that ended up being his lot in life.
Stuck with,
Yeah.
Yeah, he was the smart kid. He seemed to resent it a little bit.
Yeah. He's like, man, I was smart. I could have done more, but here I am.
His dad probably didn't even need to read. His dad probably didn't even read, and he ran a freaking successful dairy. And then the son goes off and is all super smart, and then gets back and has to run a dairy.
Right. And so one of the other things that they do is they go follow the path that George is alleged to have taken from the vicarage to the colliery and then back. And it's daytime. They clock it at like 18 and a half minutes for them to do it. They have to like climb a couple of fences, cross a paddock or two, go like under, like in a sort of like not fully underground tunnel, but like something that takes them under a road or a stream or something like that.
I can't imagine them doing that in anything other than just like suits and vests and stuff,
Yeah.
like just like super fancy like top hats.
That's almost certainly what they were wearing.
I'm gonna get dirt all over my nice knickers. I don't know what you call it.
I think about that all the time. Like people who dressed really nicely back then, just the world was dirty.
Oh,
if you're just walking down the street, it's probably just, if it's cobblestone, you're lucky. It's probably dirt and mud.
Yeah.
And then there's, depending on what part of town you may or may not be walking through, there's shit on the streets.
Literal shit on the streets.
So people were probably just getting their nice clothes dirty all the time. At least just their pants and their coat,
Oh, all the time. Yeah.
And so, I don't know, it's just something that I think about, and it's just kind of interesting to be like, man, their shit was just shitty all the time. Yeah. It sucks.
Yeah, literally just covered in...
like, super sucks.
Yeah.
You probably have like one or two, if you have the money to, really nice suits that you only wear when you're going to get right into a carriage, exit the carriage at the ball, and that's it. Like, it never has a chance to get dirty.
Like us, at
everything else
stuff we put in our suit bags that
we
take,
exactly.
with us to fly, and
they probably treat like their day suits in the same way that we treat like jeans and a t-shirt. Like, if I spill coffee on it, sucks, but whatever.
I'm getting it to this point where I've worn my work clothes, my kind of nice dress pants, and my nice like button-down shirts so much, and I have so many of them that I've worn for like 2 years now that I'm getting to the point where it's like I would wear this shirt to do anything. Yeah. It's like I'll look kind of okay doing it. It's That's like all relatively nice shirts. It's kind of cool. Like I'm, and also like just they're kind of bigger too, so it's like
gives you a little bit more movement. Yeah. I am way too vain and particular in the purpose of different things that I own to do something like that.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
My nice clothes are for going out and doing whatever. And then if I'm not particular, I have like 3 drawers of shirts, right? And each of those drawers are an organization of purpose. Where like one of the top drawer is like kind of like daily t-shirts that are for show or whatever, The second drawer is just comfortable shirts that I wear around the house because they're like loose or really soft or whatever. And then the third drawer are work shirts. that I wear if I'm doing something outside or something like that.
Yeah.
And they never shall they cross.
I have like basically just like work clothes like that I wear to go to work, so like button downs and relatively nice jeans and dress pants or whatever. Like
I guess that you get a bit.
Dickies, you know,
some of your clothing can cross over a little bit more than mine because I have a uniform.
I was gonna say mine always like mine always crosses over. It just kind of got to the point where like I would get off work and I couldn't let my like outfit or whatever like slow me down, I guess. Like I have to just like, all right, I gotta get under my truck or whatever. And then
when you have enough of them, then it's not like you can only have these 4 that need to be worn for your shifts that we can then wash.
Well, also my job was pretty like I would get dirty, I'd get all over the ground and stuff. So after a certain point, getting dirty in the clothes just became normal. Yeah. Anyway, enough about that. So they're going through the they go
down the path that evidently he had to have taken. Yeah. And they're like, that was 18 and a half minutes. And we are fit people. In the daylight, we all have excellent eyesight. There's no way George could have done this at night, gotten here, done the deed, and back in an hour. And so that's, just another thing that they've investigated. Yeah, because he's got bad eyesight. He's not described as being in any sort of shape, aside from just a man that walks to like work or walks to the station and then whatever. Yeah. So that's, just another kind of like coin in Arthur's purse of investigation. After that is when they go talk to Brooks and, which we've already been over, and then Brooks' kid. And then, so he's now got, at the very least, all the beginnings of his investigation and the points that he is going to look into next. Yeah,
his highlighted items.
Yeah, now that he's got a greater picture of the story, he's got bullet points that are still questions, or they're going to be his avenues of attack. Yeah. Because he does see it as a full-on attack that he's doing. These bullet points are, first, in 2 sections. First is the trial. Second is the culprit. Because not only is he going to exonerate George, but he's going to find who's at fault for everything. In regards to the trial, he's got questions about Yelverton, or at least Yelverton's process and everything that Yelverton was the attorney that took over after George was incarcerated and was making pushes for a re-examination and all that sort of stuff. So he, at least as a bullet point, he's like, I need to go through all the resources that he was using and add to them and this and that. Wants to talk to Dr. Butter and his opinion on, what exactly it was with the hairs that were found. He's got questions about the letters, and specifically about the letters in regards to the trial. Gurin, who was the handwriting expert.
That guy.
Yeah. He's got questions about George's eyesight and, his eyesight's play into everything. Right. Because while he knows that George has terrible eyesight, he doesn't know the extent to which they are terrible. He's still waiting on that prescription to come back from the doctor he referred him to.
Yeah. That seems to be the big leaner.
Yeah, that's like his main point right now. That's like his main argument is like, this motherfucker can't see.
Yeah, no way. And then
he's also got questions about Harry Green, who was the guy who cut a horse while George was on trial, and then immediately admitted to having done it himself or whatever. Which I don't remember if we talked about it during the notes or during this, but that was something that Harry Charlesworth mentioned. Because Arthur and Wood ask him, like, so what about this Green dude? We want to find him and talk to him too if we can. And he's like, oh, that motherfucker got sent to South Africa.
Yeah, he left.
Somebody that nobody knows or nobody has said who it was got him a one-way ticket to South Africa after he had gone back on that confession.
Sounds like a one-way trip to South Africa.
Right. Right. No, I don't think it was that. If this was a TV, if this was 24, yeah. But, so evidently Harry goes back on that confession, at least to the town and sort of publicly, and the police shut him up about it, and then we assume then send him to South Africa. So, like, here's, a ship ticket, get out of here.
Yeah.
So he's got questions about that, what the hell happened there.
Yeah.
And then as well as Anson and his just general role in all of this.
Anson.
In regards to the culprit, He's got questions regarding the letters, you know, the psychopathy of it, what any of it sort of means. Are there multiple people writing? Mm-hmm. Are the people writing the same as the cutters? Are they just overlapping in a way? Which is all stuff that we speculated on. He's got questions about the animals in general, the murder weapon that was used, which we were just talking about.
Yeah.
The gap in between the harassment that was happening. It was like a 7-year gap. Questions about Walsall School and all the boys that went there. One of them being William Greatorex, who was called as a witness, who had evidently, or was implied as having written one of the letters, but they determined that he hadn't or whatever, you know? Mm-hmm. I feel like he's a little suspect anyways.
Yeah.
And then he's also got questions about all of the maimings. I assume he wants to just try to tie them all together in a way, or at least find through lines in them.
Yeah.
In the same way that he wants to find through lines in the letters to try and help him find the culprit, because that's the second part of his plan, is to find the actual culprit. After that, they go back to Undershaw, having finished their first part of the investigation, and George's diagnosis comes from the doctor, and it's in a different way than they write actual prescriptions these days, I think, or at least the lettering that they use in the book looks different than what I could find out and what mine looks like.
Yeah.
And Arthur's like, holy shit, this dude's eyes are fucked up. I was right. This is it. We've got it. This is what everything hinges on. This is going to be great.
Yeah.
And then he just continues researching. He spends like days reading all the letters.
Nice.
And finding all the connections that he can. Did you get a lot of that in the...
Not at all.
Oh man, that was probably some of my favorite part, was him pouring through the letters, and it wasn't like pages and pages and pages, but it talks about him having, he goes through all the letters, his sort of mindset in going through all the letters, and then ultimately him determining that it's likely 3 different authors. There's one who signs himself as God, or God Satan, and then there's one who is just like outright insane in their religious fervor, and then there's another one who's just vulgar for vulgar's sake almost.
Okay.
And those 3 personalities seem to exist, or at least present themselves to him as he reads everything and tries to connect them. He, through whatever other means of deduction that aren't presented, decides that maybe they're 3 brothers, or at least that's the most likely of the scenarios that he's decided on. They probably live together so that they can be in on it together. And in his opinion, probably don't live too far away from George.
Yeah.
Or the vicarage, rather. So then he's trying to figure out, well, where would that be? Would that be like an orphanage or like a boarding school? None of those things sort of exist around in the range that he's set. He sets like a 2-mile radius. And then he also talks about, or he thinks about, how some of the letters are extremely long, and so the person must have had nothing but time on their hands. Yeah. So maybe it's a household of what he calls idlers, which is probably a term back then, but I assume it's people who are like unemployed and have no purpose and no drive to do anything, So I found that part really interesting, at least.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Maybe if only for that's the part that I've been fixated on, is who is the author of all of this, and me thinking that it's got to all be the same person, or if it is a gang, then they are related and they're in this together,
Yeah.
At least that's what I've been theorizing on this whole time. So I really like this section.
Yeah, no, I like the guess that it's 3 brothers. It seems like it could be super likely.
He also comes across at the very least, a temporary answer to the question of the gap in harassment. And it's sort of, if it actually happened this way, or if there's some embellishment either on Arthur's, in real life Arthur Conan Doyle, because he retold this thing.
He wrote a book about it. Yeah.
Right. And so either like, slight embellishment on his part, or maybe on Julian Barnes's part, or whoever's, but there's a part where he's sounding off of Woody, saying like, here's some things that I have some problems on. What do you think? And Woody just kind of gives him the obvious answer. And one of them, when he asks like, what about this gap in harassment? Woody's like, maybe they weren't there, and so they couldn't harass him. Where would they have gone? Well, maybe he was overseas. I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
And then Arthur finds some sort of through line about mentioning of being sent overseas by one of the writers. He says, like, I don't think they'd hang me for this, but they might just send me overseas. And then the last letter is about, or the last form of harassment is the ad being taken out about the vicarage selling everything at the Blackpool market, which is the leisure town of Liverpool, which is a major port. So sea. And then
really?
Evidently the first letter that starts the harassment again later on also has some sort of through line about seas and being overseas or seafaring life or whatever. So Arthur's like, and you had it right on the head, Woody, saying he went overseas. Look at all this. This has got to be it. So it's a little, a little Holmesian in a way, in the way that it plays out. And maybe that's just why those sorts of moments in novels and stories is great, is because sometimes life does play out that way.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly
Maybe that's part of why that sort of moment is great. So that's all that he kind of gathers from the letters, and he comes to hopefully some pretty solid deductions and ideas. So he starts writing all these letters to the other people that he wants to talk to. He writes letters to the headmaster of Walsall. He writes a letter to Captain Anson, to Dr. Butter, and to the Home Office Secretary. All for different purposes. How much of this did you get?
I got some of that.
Okay.
As you were talking about it, it kind of made sense. I don't remember why he wrote all those letters, but I do remember him contacting.
Because those are like the next people that he wants to talk to get more information. Now that he's got more opinions as well.
I got and I also got the parts where he was with his Watson or whatever, Woods. And it even had like an internal like a dialogue with him where he was like, well, if Watson got that sort of comment, he would have taken it as a compliment. But it's like, it almost seemed like, but I don't.
Right, yeah. He's like sort of aware that maybe even the Watson character is Arthur's reflection of Wood.
Oh, yeah.
And so he's sort of like, God, this character is supposed to be me. He really makes me feel like him sometimes, but whatever. Like, he kind of goes with it. There is there's like a whole like 3 paragraphs of him thinking internally or whatever in the book. And part of it does say that he doesn't mind it at all. It doesn't mean anything. He's like utterly loyal to him. If it doesn't just, kind of like irk him a little bit now and then to be treated like, a goofball.
And the number 2 of the, like the... Right.
And...
side character.
So he gets responses on all the letters. Well, I guess actually prior to that, sort of unsolicited, and it'll be interesting to find out how it happened, but Arthur gets a letter from the culprit. And it says...
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I remember that.
It says something, like, there's no point in what you're doing. Don't worry about it. We know that George did it, and we know that it's not going to change. But then what sort of, at least, in my overanalyzation of it, what makes them almost sound desperate in the letter is that they also then call out the previous headmaster of Walsall School, and they sort of... because it's like in 2 parts, the letter that he gets from them. The first part is saying, it's almost sort of professional in a way. It's like, dear honored sir, don't worry about doing anything about Arthur. We know that he did it and that nobody's going to believe that he didn't because he's an odd sort. And then immediately they sort of change attitude. And they're like, also, no one ever got any fucking education at Walsall while headmaster blah, blah, blah was there. That swine. He got the bullet after some letters were sent to the whoever is above him. Ha ha. So it's like immediately they become unprofessional and almost defensive. Yeah. And so it's an interesting thing to read into, at least. It might mean nothing, but that's the impression that I get. Yeah. So it's interesting. If it comes out, how did they know that, one, he was already thinking about the whole Walsall angle and what that means, and specifically what the previous headmaster's curriculum had to do with anything, and then 2, that he's even involved at all, aside from just literally having gone to Wirely and probably stood out. I mean, people who know who he is. But then after that, he gets letters back from everybody. The current headmaster of Wirely is like, no, the previous headmaster served with great distinction, was not dismissed.
Yeah.
And it would be ridiculous for anybody to say otherwise, which could be a cover-up. Who knows?
Yeah, it sounds like it.
The secretary of the Home Office is like, I'm not reopening that fucking case, dude. And Captain Anson just says, I will be greatly interested to know what Sherlock Holmes has to say about a case in real life.
Because it was kind of mocking for sure.
Totally just like mocks him and calls him out. He's like, you've got no place doing this. Don't bother us.
Who do you think you are?
Which is such a common like local police thing to do, to be like, don't get in our fucking business. You don't know anything about this town, you know? Which I sort of get in a way.
Yeah, I get that they're like in the industry, you know, so they see more cases. They've probably gone to classes and learned about different trends and things, but
even like the defense of your own, you know, organization and your town.
I get it. Yeah, I get it. Never mind.
That's something that happens in a lot of shows where the heroes work for like the FBI or the CIA or something. Happens almost every episode in the X-Files, where they show up to some, you know, town in middle America and they're like, we know that y'all now have jurisdiction because of this federal crime, but stay the fuck out of our business. This is, you know, our town's business and we're going to handle it. You know, that sort of thing.
Jurisdiction now.
Right, yeah. There's often that moment where like the thing happens that makes it a federal crime, and then Mulder's like, well, now it's my jurisdiction, so aliens. Mulder.
Who's in charge here?
And then lastly, he gets a letter from Dr. Butter, and Dr. Butter's like, yeah, I'll talk with you.
Yeah.
So they go to talk. Did you have more or less the whole conversation in the audiobook? Or just kind of like the finer points of when he meets with Butter?
Yeah, definitely. They talk about like, it was cool because like Arthur was like asking him about all the different talking points of like why he would be there, and like how come he didn't have like more blood on him, and he's like, well, I mean, he could have worn an apron, you know, and just use that. And it's like, there's no evidence of an apron. And he's like, I'm not a detective. I was just saying there could have been an apron. Could have had one of his posse do it. There was another argument that there was a gang in town, and that it could be a gang interaction. So he could have had one of those guys do it, getting very minimal blood on him at all, if any at all, you know. So those are just two possibilities. And he's like, okay, fair enough, you know. And then it just seemed like he was very interested in like how long did it take to get the
that just kind of came out of nowhere. But at least it seemed like not a whole lot came out of this interaction until at the very end, where he finds out about the time discrepancy. But he does sort of seem satisfied with all the answers that he gets. I think he's just sort of trying to get clarity on different points to further strengthen the ideas that he already has. Yeah,
I think that that's the big thing with the medical like examiner there. Like I think he was displaying the evidence in a way that either side could use it, so that it was like, well, you know, this happened because, you know, and he could have worn an apron, and it's like, I mean, it seemed like he gave the evidence in such an unbiased way.
And that seems to be his whole goal.
Yeah, and then
he mentions that he gets frustrated. At some point, he gets frustrated with Arthur because Arthur is being sort of like counsel and asking some leading questions and trying to get to a point and trying to get Butter to, you know, say something that will, you know, help his point, even though they're just talking, you know, one-on-one. And so Butter gets sort of like irritated and is like, look, you have to understand, I've been doing this for 20 years. All I've ever done is go there and tell them exactly what it is that I observed as a man of science. I don't really care about what happens either direction, and people are constantly misinterpreting what I have to say. But Arthur does sort of like get him to not deviate from that, but give a bit more of his opinion rather than his observation. Be like, well, wouldn't you think that different parts of the animal would have different kinds of hair? And he's like, yeah, that as a statement makes sense, yes. Yeah. So why does George's jacket only have the exact same kinds of hair all over it? And he's like, that's not for me to speculate.
Yeah,
but I see what you're saying. And, you know, just sort of that sort of stuff. So it's like he's getting confirmation of things that he's coming up with from somebody who he believes to be honest and giving straightforward answers.
It seems like he was, at least he was depicted that way.
But then at the end there, he's asking questions about when did you get the packaging? Because what he wants to do is get Butter to maybe reveal more information about possible either accidental or intentional contamination of the piece of horse or pony and the jacket. And to which Butters like, when it came to me, there were separate packages, and there's literally no way that contamination could have happened in my lab. Yeah. And so then Arthur's like, okay, well, it's such and such and such. They talk a bit more, and then says, well, what time was it that they were delivered? 9:00. And so, at first there's some confusion because Arthur thinks that it's 9 a.m. It's like, God damn, that was a really quick delivery, because it was still like 7:45 when the inspector went and grabbed George from his office. And then Butter's like, no, 9 p.m. I was really fucking pissed about it because I wanted to go home. Yeah. And so the reveal is that there's at least a 12-hour window from when the Inspector Campbell went and got everything from the vicarage to when they got delivered to Butter's office. So it's a huge window with which tampering could have been done. Is presumably his next avenue of attack. And that's all off of, one of his prior points that he had laid out, is how were there hairs on there at the trial, these uniform hairs from an animal that has different hairs in different parts of his body, when, while I was presented to the ALGs, they swear that there was no hairs on it. Yeah. So either the ALGs are perjurers, or there was some sort of incompetence or purposeful tampering of the evidence, and therefore fabrication by the police. Yeah,
it's one of those. It's those now. Like, those are the only options.
So
it's right there, dude.
It's right there. We're putting all the clues together. Yeah. We're getting there.
And that's everything we read, right?
That's pretty much it. Arthur then goes back home, writes up a report of everything that he's determined. He's has like a huge rush of inspiration, and he spends 2 days just writing. He writes 15,000 words.
Yeah, 15,000. That's what it said.
And even then he's like, this isn't complete. As I learn more, I will refine this and add more and blah, 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 blah. But he sends that off to the Stafford Constabulary, and then gets a letter back from Captain Anson again, this time saying, why don't you come to dinner? Wow. And we'll talk about it. Yeah. Although still mocking, he's at the end of the letter, he says something like, let me know if Mr. Holmes needs accommodations as well. And then that's it. Arthur then goes and talks to Jean some, because they're starting to lay the bricks for their upcoming, or soon to be upcoming, wedding. Yeah. And they spend a lot of time talking about the spiritism, like we mentioned earlier. But that'll likely be inconsequential to what we're concerned with. Yeah. It's just something that's there. Yeah.
Well, so, cool, man. Yeah, that was...
Who knows? Yeah. It's coming together. I know you know at this point. Or you have a greater idea than I do. You might not have the full answer yet, but...
We'll see.
We'll see. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's...
I'm more excited than I have been for previous parts of this book.
Yeah, this book for sure has been interesting the whole time, but maybe not as engaging, like we've already said. But it's getting real engaging now, and it's...
Because it's all going down.
We've got it all. Going down, yeah. That's
Arthur's energy is infectious.
That's a good point. Well, cool. Yeah. So, what are we doing this next week? Finishing the book?
We're just going to finish it.
Finish it out.
It's like 120, 125 pages, something like that.
Cool. Should be.
So, that's probably about 4.5, 5 hours of reading, depending on your read speed. I think I'm sort of medium, and I expect it to take me 4 hours.
Okay. So nice. Yeah, dude, I'm a slow reader for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to think I was really fast. People used to tell me I was fast. I believe that less than I did back then.
Yeah, some people just read through books and they retain really well. Like, I have to read really slow, and I still retain. I retain okay, I guess, if I read slower, but yeah, dude, I can't just be reading really fast. Like, I never was good at speed reading or reading quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a weird skill that I don't think I want. I feel like even if I could acquire that skill, it would then be the only way I could read.
Right. For
and that would be a bummer, I think.
Couldn't take your time.
Yeah.
Enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like we are.
Right.
All right. Well, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at at ears_stamps.
Yes.
Gmail, dog ears and timestamps at gmail.com.
Yes.
Yeah, that's and then follow Will on Instagram.
You can follow me on Instagram if you want.
Yeah, and that's everything. Yeah, we'll see y'all
We'll see y'all next week, and maybe the cat won't be scratching his cat post.
I know. Yeah, and also hopefully
So
I get home
rude.
safe. If y'all heard anything crazy during the recording, there was like a storm blowing.
Yeah, there's
the
definitely
whole
like a
time we were
front blowing
recording.
through.
So yeah, we kept.
There's like an Arctic blast that's just grazing us right now.
We're getting
so
the
we're getting the
edge
edge of
Arctic
it.
blast. Yeah. Well, if y'all heard anything, that's what that was. So
Right.
wish me luck getting home tonight. But
we'll talk to y'all next week, and I'll either be in a really good mood or a really bad mood. One because of the book, and one because of the Super Bowl.
we'll find out. But
right. Yep, I'm Will Hedrick.
And I'm Jordan Schaffer.
And this is Dog Ears and Timestamps. Go Pats.